Hello and welcome to episode 75 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Richard Pomfrett. Richard, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you, Lewis, and thanks for inviting me on.
It's an absolute pleasure. Really looking forward to this one. We had a really good conversation beforehand, so I'm excited for our conversation. But as always, first off, Richard, in your own words, what makes you a man?
First of all, great question. Just for the audience, I was preempted on this question and had a little bit of think about it. Great question, and we'll get onto this later, but I ask a very similar question to the boys I work with when I work with them. And this question leads on to an activity that involves making a big list of words about manhood and masculinity and who you are. And then as we go through our program, we add to this word. We add words to this list. So I thought I would do a similar thing. But also, I'm fully aware that when I do this in schools, this list could end up with hundreds of words on. So I have made a short list for you. It's going to take me, it's a little bit less work for me, and it's going to stop your listeners from being bored. So I've got my list here for you. So what makes me a man? I'm a son, a brother, a father of three, and a husband. I'm strong and brave. I'm insecure and scared. I'm a provider and a protector, but often need support from those I protect and provide for. I'm confident. I take risks. I overthink. I worry, and I suffer from imposter syndrome. Basically, Lewis, what I'm saying is I'm complex, and I think most men are. That's my answer.
Amazing. He actually has done his homework. It was on a piece of paper and everything. I'm super impressed with that. I really enjoyed that. Thanks so much, Richard. That's really appreciated. Yeah, it's a great question. I absolutely love it. And we'll definitely touch on a little bit more, I guess, on why you probably ask a similar question and why I ask it a little bit later in the podcast. But let's sort of start with a bit more of an intro. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is you do in the men and boys space?
Okay, so all of my work is focused around helping and supporting young people. Most of my day-to-day work involves working directly with young people in schools. And, excuse me, and as a byproduct of supporting young people, I also do lots of work with adults that work with young people. So that could be school staff, it could be coaches, youth workers. And I do lots of work with parents and carers as a way of supporting their children and young people in their life. And my work really is split into two main areas. So the first one is I run an organization called the Stay Safe Initiative. We're a community interest company set up with the sole purpose of educating and protecting young people. And we run various sessions in schools for children and young people. We do lots of work surrounding bullying and friendship and help young people have positive and healthy relationships. I do a lot of work connected to the digital world. So again, helping children of all ages be safe and be safe online and have positive online lives. And we also train up children in schools to become peer mentors and help schools set up and run successful peer mentoring schemes. So that's sort of like one area of my work. And the other area, which is probably going to be more in line with today's conversation, is my work with boys and young men through our Boys to Men program. And this is a program that's been designed to help boys and young men think critically about manhood, discover who they are, and I suppose giving them the freedom to think about what kind of men they want to be in today's world. So yeah, they're the two areas that most of my work is concentrated on.
Amazing. And obviously quite a apt conversation given the current conversation around this. Obviously you've been doing this for significantly longer than a Netflix show and the odd football manager saying some things. But let's talk a little bit about boys and boys sort of now. What do you think has changed over time that has led to this sort of, let's say, crises of boys with a loss of identity?
So I suppose a good way of answering this question is to quickly go through how I ended up working solely with boys and, through our Boys to Men work. So as I said earlier, I've been doing lots of work. I've been working in schools since just before 2013. And that was the work through our Stay Safe work. And most of that work was focused on working with mixed age groups and all genders. So not boy specific. But lots of the work, as I mentioned, was focused around, or is still actually focused around, the online world. And we support lots of schools in that area. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I started to get contacted by some of the schools that I was working with in regards to, the online world and online safety. And so schools were contacting us. We know them, we support them, and they got in contact and said, "Look, we're having a little bit of an issue in school. We're starting to hear a name being mentioned a lot by our boys. You can probably guess who that name is." And people like Andrew. Well, at the time it was just Andrew Tate. That was a name. And they said to us, would you be happy to come back into school and do some targeted work with our boys, specifically our lads in school, about people like Andrew Tate? Well, as I said, they thought it was just Andrew Tate at the time, an online influence. So I was more than happy to do that, and arranged to go in. This happened at a few schools. Arranged to go in and speak to some of their lads about online influence, people like Andrew Tate, and then my mission, excuse me, my mission was to help them think critically about these messages, help them understand where these messages are coming from, and again to look at these sort of messages through a critical lens. That was my objective when going in there. But it became very evident really quickly when having conversations with boys about people like Andrew Tate, through the conversations having with them, asking them, what do you feel, what do you find so polarizing, or what's attracting you to this kind of content? It became evident that actually I'd gone in there to talk about Andrew Tate, but it unpacked a much wider problem, to the point that actually Andrew Tate is just a symptom of a wider problem that boys are facing. So it's through these conversations with boys that I started to hear things like, well, no one understands us. We're always labelled. We're quite often demonised. Whenever we are mentioned online, in the press, or even sometimes at school, we're talked about as if we're a problem. No one cares about us. Lots of other groups have got their people supporting them. That could be Black Lives Matter. It could be the feminist movements. It could be LGBTQ+ and the gender equality. All great movements, by the way. But they would say, well, we haven't got anything and no one's got our back, essentially. But this guy online, he understands us, and he's saying what he's the messages that he's given us, we're gravitating towards. So this happened multiple times, and then I would then go back to the school after these conversations and say, look, actually, we've spent the last 2 or 3 hours with your lads talking about people like Andrew Tate and the online world, but I've come away from these conversations understanding that actually they need far more support than just the content that they're seeing online, and that's what prompted us to develop our Boys to Men program. And it's basically I felt that they felt that they were unseen and unheard. And that's what I still hear in schools now.
It's so interesting that's coming up, and it's a common theme, because I always seem to feel like there's been this narrative that men have been told. So like, you are a benefit of the patriarchy. You are all violent against women and girls. You are all misogynistic in some way, shape, or form. And that seems to have trickled down into the generations. And like, I think we spoke about this briefly, but like, the patriarchy, as it's deemed, was like the 1950s was like the height of it, and that was 75 years ago. And to still put that pressure on boys while simultaneously rising up girls through feminist movements, which, as we've both alluded to, are fantastic. There's just zero conversation about what that means for boys. And even though then it still seemed like you were sort of brought in to sort of say, just don't watch him rather than like dig a little deeper. So like,
Yeah.
in your opinion, what was your thoughts on that? Like why did you go against the grain and were like, actually, I'm not going to tell them not to watch. I want to find out why.
Well, first of all, and I've sort of learnt this through experience now, working with children in schools, and obviously having children myself. So I've got 3 children that are either in their late teens or early 20s. So and working with children for a long time. Telling children not to do something just doesn't work. And fill in the gap. That's sex education, that's alcohol, drugs, you name it. So the approach of actually this looking at this particular subject and people like Andrew Tate saying, well, this guy's an idiot, don't listen to him. That's just, if anything, that makes people like this more intriguing and more polarizing. So telling them no just doesn't work. Telling them you shouldn't doesn't work. So when I work with young people, my job is to, first of all, listen to them, get them on board. Saying to a child, this guy is bad or these messages are harmful, it's not the way forward. What I do, and I always find whatever the subject matter is, what I like to do when I work with young people is, first of all, find out what they like, find out what they find intriguing, what are any of the positives. So when I look at people like Andrew Tate, that will be my approach. You say, well, what do you like about this person? Which obviously, when this name exploded in schools were given lots of guidance, which was the complete opposite. It was shut the conversation down. Don't talk about this person. I've even spoken to children in schools that said, if we mention that name, we get told off, there's a sanction or we get put into detention. But again, this just makes this person seem even more valuable to them. So I would say, what do you like? What do you like about this person? Are there any positives? And I would hear some. I would hear things like, well, watching people like Andrew Tate inspires me to work hard in school because I want to get a good job and earn lots of money so I can, potentially buy a supercar one day. It's watching people like that has motivated me to take an interest in my physical health and work out and, start going to the gym. It's given me work ethic. All of these things individually are actually arguably extremely positive for young people. So that's always my start of my conversation. What do you like? What intrigues you? What are the positives? The benefit of doing that is that you're not shutting this conversation down, but it also allows you then to look at the opposite side, the negatives. So giving them the freedom to talk about what they like already opens up the room for healthy conversation. But then it also allows you to think about, okay, well, are there some negatives? Are there some downsides? And giving them that freedom to critically evaluate this kind of content, which this may be the first time they've ever done that, then you start to hear things, and I did in schools, and I do now today. Then I would start to hear things like, well, actually, he does say some quite, he does say some quite damaging things about women, or, the messages that he gives you about controlling the relationship and being dominant. And, I don't really agree with all that stuff. And that's where the magic happens. And that allows you then to, okay, well, there are some pros and cons. Then you can start to give them the skills to do this on a day-to-day basis when they are consuming any kind of content online. Can you find the benefits? Can you gain any positives, but also put aside some of the negatives? And that's always my approach when I work with young people. It could be talking about social media. It could be anything. What do you like? What are the good bits and how do we benefit from that? But to benefit from the good things, we do need to understand that there are some downsides, and that's always the best approach, I think.
So critical thinking is one thing that I am a big believer in. It's something that it's just a skill I've had my whole life for some bizarre reason, probably because I'm slightly analytical, and that's part of the reason why. But why do you think there's such a narrative now for a push towards positive role models rather than a narrative around this just to use your business, Boys to Men, where is this like allowing people to explore? Why is it all about putting something in place for them?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think lots of people want to solve problems. And just coming off the back of this TV show that you alluded to earlier, Adolescence, I've seen everyone and everyone, that has an idea of how to cure the issue. And there's people talking about role models. There's people talking about showing this in school. There's people talking about you must do this, you must do that. The problem is none of these things are bringing young people into this conversation. So one thing never ever works. What I try to do with my Boys to Men program is, first of all, if we want to help young people, we need to give them the space, a safe space to understand themselves. So, through our work in our Boys to Men program, that's what we generally do. We start all of our sessions, and obviously we work with young people at various ages. So the conversations change; they're more age appropriate for their age, and that's primary all the way through to higher education. But the narrative and the mission is very similar. We first of all start to help children understand who they are. So with boys and young men, we start to give them the theme to think about what kind of men they want to be, who they are, get them to sort of think about themselves, think and share and talk about the pressures that they face, why certain stereotypes exist and how they impact them. We allow them to think about their insecurities, their emotions, and again, in a safe way, getting them to really think about where they are, who they are, and what kind of people they want to be. Once you then can give them the confidence to start thinking about themselves, then you can start to think about other people. So that's where you can then start to think about how we can put this certain things into practice through our interactions with others. But one thing is it's never enough. Just saying you need a role model, they do. Boys definitely need role models, but it's not the only thing. Just saying, well, you shouldn't go online and look at these toxic messages that you see. Again, that's not the answer. We need to allow young people to look at themselves, look at their lives, and everyone's obviously different, to then give them the confidence to start thinking about where they fit into society. And then you can start to think about building up skills, whether that's critical thinking skills, whether that's emotional literacy, about how they can start to communicate with people around them. So one thing is never, it's just, it's never going to make or break.
When you talk about all of this stuff this sort of being implemented in the schools that you're working in, and I sort of look at myself and sort of, I guess, men of a sort of similar age to sort of like late 20s, mid 20s to sort of like early 30s. I personally feel like a lot of those men, in inverted commas, are boys in men's bodies. I don't feel like that they've been afforded that sort of conversation. They've actually just had to go through the world as it was sort of laid out for them. And they will then hit something. So whether it's a child or a job loss or a parent dying or something like that, that then will take them one way or the other. They'll either rise from the ashes or it will send them on a bit of a spiral. So do you think boys need maybe like a rite of passage, to use like a cliche term? Do you think there's something that's maybe missing in modern day society from that too?
I think they just need conversation, Lewis. I really do. I mean, when I work with boys, and again, it changes depending on the age, quite often the conversations that I'm initiating and helping them to think about and to challenge and to sort of like explore together, quite often it's the first time they've ever had these conversations. Just giving a young person the freedom to think about what kind of men they want to be. We do a really great activity, which right near the start of our work, when it's all about trying to find out where their head's at. And as you said, as a young person grows up into adulthood, they're being influenced. They are quite often having these messages subconsciously taken on throughout their life. And that could be the messages they have at home, whether they've got male role models, what their life's like, their interactions with school, the interactions that they've had with teachers, or, and then eventually they become young adults. So what we do this really great activity, and it works for all ages. I ask them 2 questions. It's focused around manhood. So the first question I ask them is, what are the best bits about being a man? Now, this could be, we got 2 angles on this. Could be their own experience of being a boy or a man and what they like about it, or what they think is to come in the future. And obviously we hear lots of positive things. It usually equates to having freedom, earning money, driving a car one day, getting a girlfriend, gaming with my mates, playing football, all just really normal, positive things. But this brings us on to asking a second question, which is really what we're trying to get at. So we've asked them what the best bits are. The second question I asked them isn't what most people would think is the best and worst. The next question I asked them is, what are the hardest things about being a boy or being a man? And again, that could be depending on their age. If it's a primary school age, it's usually getting them to think about what could potentially be the hardest things growing up, what you've got to still face moving forward. If I'm working with a young adult in a college setting or a university setting, it could be down to a little bit more about lived experience and what you found a struggle. But I get them to think about what's hard about being a man. And this is always really eye-opening for me, especially when I'm working with really young children. Because then you start to hear things like, well, I've got to provide for a family. I've got to be the provider, not a provider, the provider. I've got to earn money. I've got to succeed. I've got to hold down a job. I've got to be financially stable. I've got to raise a family. I've got to support a family. I've even had children at a very young age say, well, one of the hardest things that I think about being a man is what happens if you have a baby, you have a family, and you lose that child, through separation or divorce, and you don't get to see that child that often. And even at a young age, they are feeling the pressures that you mentioned, the patriarchy. They are feeling the pressures that society have placed on them. Now, it's not necessarily someone saying, oh, you've got to do this, but they feel it. They feel it through the messages that they may have had at home. They feel it through the conversations they may have had in their community. They feel it from what they see online. They feel it from their conversations and experiences at school. And they feel it at a young age. And if these children and young people are not given the safe space to talk about, well, why do these pressures exist? Do you think that's correct? Why are these? This obviously brings us on to talk about stereotypes and gender roles. Do you think that's right? What can we do to change that? If these children have never had that conversation, they're going to have these issues and these pressures. They're going to be inside, and one day they're going to realize that they are a reality. And that's where, mental health and potentially other things come into play. So that's a long answer to your question, but it's about having conversations at the youngest possible age to help them start to unpack some of this stuff.
Are you surprised by some of those answers, considering how young some of them are?
I was to start with, Lewis. Especially if I'm working with, our work in primary school, our Boys to Men work in primary school is generally, it's a transition program so it's usually for year sixes that are about to move on to secondary school. So they're the older age groups in there, but they're still 10 or 11. I was to start with. It's like, wow, I can't believe, especially when you're thinking about young children talking about losing a child or, these, but now it's become normalized and they feel it at that young age. They will say things that you think, wow, you already feel the pressure to succeed, support a family, hold down a job, get good grades. And that is a lot of pressure for a young person. But the benefit, and I always like to look at the positives, is by hearing that. And then we can sort of have that conversation with them about it. And we can almost like take some of that pressure away, and we can start get them to think about, actually, do we need to be the protector or the provider? How about being a protector and having more of an equal role in a relationship? So we can talk about that stuff.
Those were some of the words that you used in your initial definition of what makes you a man, provider, protector.
Yeah.
Why do you think those specifically, because they come up a lot, I hear them a lot.
Right, okay.
Guests and other people that I speak to, and boys as well. Why do you think those specific words still come up, even with the push for equality, the rise of feminism, and everything that seems to be, on paper, equal all round?
I mean, yeah, I support all of that. It should be equal all around. It is in my household. I am a protector and a provider, but I've got a wife and 3 children that also do the same for me. And I think, there is a biological difference. Men are generally, I feel, they like to take that role. They like to not be in charge. They like to protect, and they like to be able to. I like the fact that I can provide for my family. It makes me feel needed. It makes me feel wanted. It makes me feel good. It's definitely not 100% requirement, though. And again, I think that's where we need to sort of differentiate between the two. There's nothing wrong with being that provider or protector role, but it's not a requirement. It's a good question, and I'm not actually sure whether it's biology, whether it's back, And when I ask a similar question in schools, it's like, you go back to the caveman days, and the men went out and hunted, and the women stayed at home, and all of these things. And as generations have gone past, we're at a place now where it's definitely more equal. We all life experience and generations has shaped what we now are as men, I think.
I mean, just talking now and based on our conversation, I think I'm really going to start to shift that and start to ask the question, well, what's a modern day provider and what's a modern day protector? Because I think that's what's changed, right? The word the way you feel when you're in that, your provider, your protector mentality, but what you're actually doing might be different to a bloke in the 1950s who was literally just going to work and chucking some money on the table. And that's probably something to start to unpick, because what does that look like now, I guess, is the next question, right?
No, I totally agree. And, and it's a lot of pressure. If you're, just changing that "the" to "a," if you are the protector, or you are growing up as a young person, a young man with this conversation, thinking that I need to be the protector and the provider, that's a lot of weight. That's a lot of pressure on that young person's shoulders. But yeah, just change it. There's nothing wrong with that. But, I like to use, I'm a protector, I'm a provider, and it is more equal. Now, obviously, I get a lot of protection, and my wife provides a lot to me, emotionally. My wife helps me run my companies. So we're partners in that respect. My children protect me. My children provide for me. It may not be financially, but they support me in other ways. And again, it's I think for when talking to young people about their future and healthy relationships, that's always the sort of dynamic that I would promote, is definitely equality, but it's, we all have a role to play, and it's finding the people that are willing to provide that for you as well. But obviously everyone's different. Some children I work with, they may have extremely traditional backgrounds. I have worked with lots of people that are in the traveller community, and they are, again, their community is very, the man will be the provider, go out to work, and the woman will be at home. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's whether we are all happy with them boundaries and them expectations. And if we are, no problem. That's still being modern in that approach. I think that the harmful things for young people is, I've got to, they have to. And that's not the approach that I would promote.
No, for sure. It's not a have to, it's a want to. And I think that sort of leads me on to next thought and next question, which is around relationships. And you mentioned sort of setting those boundaries and things early on, but there's a recent study and a recent sort of shift in domestic violence. So sort of 16 to 25. So I guess leaving school and going into that early adulthood, there seems to be a flip of the script, and that men seem to be more the receivers of domestic abuse in relationships from women. And the primary reason is that conversation around you not being man enough, you not being able to provide. And I want to touch on the work that you do in schools with both genders, specifically around online, and sort of see if there's any links between those two, and then how boys and young men can sort of navigate those conversations as they start to arise in early relationships.
I mean, going back to earlier, I think, first of all, whether you're working with boys or you're working with girls, I think, first of all, it's helping them understand who they are. It's helping them feel comfortable in their own skin. For someone that is comfortable in their own skin, that feels happy, that feels supported, that feels loved and needed, and that are being pushed in the right direction and supported, that's a great foundation for a healthy relationship. So I think that's always a starting point, is, are you happy with yourself? Are you happy with your life? Now, obviously, everyone has a backstory, so that can be quite hard sometimes. But that's my always starting point, is, are you happy with yourself, and are you happy in your own skin? For example, you know, when we're looking at the online world, there is a lot of hate online. There's a lot of people that are unkind online. There's a lot of keyboard warriors. But generally, people that are happy, people that are succeeding, and I'm not just talking about succeeding financially, people that are happy, that are balanced, that are positive, that are having a healthy life, they're generally not the sorts of people that are online being hateful and unkind. The people that are doing that are the ones that are not happy with themselves. They're the ones that are having struggles. You know, hurt people hurt. And it's, if you're not happy with yourself, or you're having a bad time, or you're having bad experiences, and there's lots of influences there that could potentially make that happen, then you're not going to have healthy relationships moving forward. So I think, first of all, start with themselves. Then we can start to look at the opposite sex. Then we can start to think about, what does a healthy relationship look like? What's important to you? What's important to them? And giving young people the ability to understand the other side. You know, one thing I do when I work with boys is I ask them questions like, you know, what would you love girls to know about you? What would, you know, you may not have the confidence to go and tell them, but what would you just wish they knew in advance? Yeah. And the same with girls. When I work with girls, and I partner with some organisations that run various similar sessions to our Boys to Men, but specifically for girls. And, you know, we may ask that to girls, you know, what do you wish boys knew about you? And again, it's through this sort of these conversations that they get to understand each other a little bit more. And then when they start to have these relationships, they're both in that more of an equal place. But it's about understanding each other and understand who they are. I think that's the recipe. But the domestic violence side of things, and you know, that is always a little bit of a grey area, because it is always thought that men are always the perpetrators, but we know that's not the case.
Yeah, it just interests me that it's starting to flip. I don't know whether there's an element of a rebellion against feminism from that sort of age group as well, where they don't feel that that's something that they want to fit into, so they're trying to find relationships. But again, it goes back to what you're saying, is they're not happy in themselves, they're not happy in what the world sort of looks like in general, so they're trying to take it out on the world. One thing I'd like to ask and know is, you've obviously been doing this for a while now. As a man going into schools, you must be a bit of a rarity. That seems to be the common theme, right? So have you noticed a decline in male teachers? Is that factual? What's your view on that? And do we need more?
The short answer is, we definitely need more. There is a massive deficit with male teachers in school. So primary schools, the work that I do in primary schools, it's quite common for me to visit a school for the day where there will be no male teachers in school at all. If there are, it's usually one, maybe two, but female teachers definitely dominate that environment. And in secondary schools, again, there's still a massive deficit. Now, there are more male teachers in secondary schools than primary, but the female teachers definitely still outweigh the male, and I think that's a massive impact as well. You know, boys, when we look at sort of role models, lots of the boys that I may work with, they may not have healthy role models at home, male role models. Sorry, they may have no male role models. They may then have gone through primary school with no male teachers. It may be a child that not really into sports and never really been pushed into, like football or rugby, where they may predominantly be surrounded by male role models. So for them children that are now entering secondary school, that could be the first time they're having a regular interaction with a man. And that could be only once a week, depending on what lessons they are taking. So yeah, we definitely need more male teachers. I think absolutely that does play a role, and and I get to see that. I've been to schools, even if schools where I'm not actually, we're not running our boys to men work, where it's a group of mixed, a mixed gendered group. I will have teachers. Oh, it's so good that we've got a man in today, because they'll listen to you, and you're a new face, and just your tone of voice and just the way that you are speaking is having an impact. So more of them would be a big bonus. Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember when I went to school all those years ago, I was extremely fortunate. My primary school years was equal. I had one. I think I had one every other year that was male, from like key stage 2, so 4, 5, 6, and then into high school again. Really huge faculty of male teachers, and I actually look back at that now and remember some of those teachers as like ones that wasn't naughty, but maybe a bit cheeky, and some that didn't encourage it but nurtured it rather than just tell me off and let me sort of find a little bit more of a path. But I'm well aware that they've left teaching. And they're no longer teachers. They've pursued other career paths for whatever reason, and that's a great shame, really. And I do remember most of my male teachers because they were not a novelty, but they were men, and like in my case, they were white. So that again is something that is useful and is important for boys to see for sure. Just on that.
Yeah, go on.
In general, you're going into schools. Do you think there should be a push for men of differing professions to go into schools? So whether they're nurses or they work in care homes or they work in STEM, wherever they work, to showcase that for boys you can sort of do whatever you want to do. I feel like there is a bit of a push for women in STEM, but there doesn't seem to be the verse of that for boys.
Yeah, I think that would be a great thing. As you just touched on it there. Most schools, they, when we're looking at girls, there is big push to get women and girls into, STEM and other fields that would predominantly, going back in the day, be more male dominated, which is again absolutely amazing. But as we said earlier, boys just haven't got these things. And yeah, I think that would be a great thing for getting boys or promoting boys in education, more caring, whether it's nurse or, medical professions or mental health. I think that would be a great thing, because boys, they do gravitate towards other men, and hearing them positive messages from them is great. And, even just our work, sort of going off on a little bit of a side tangent, even our work with boys in schools, we have that approach. So when we're running our Boys to Men program in school, one of our requirements, which we didn't start off by doing this, but we do now, and our work always evolves. We always try and think, how can we make this better? How can we have a little bit more of an impact? So what we do now when we work with schools is, before we work at a school, not only do we put a lot of time into through communication with schools, making sure they know exactly what's going to happen, what to expect, what's covered, what the way the session needs to be run, delivered and set up. But we also now say to schools what we want to do when we come in and work with your boys. And they're usually fairly small groups, usually about 12 to 15 boys, depending on the age group, but it's usually around that size.
Yeah.
We say to schools, what we want is you to invite a male, has to be male, just for the conversations that we're having, to sort of keep this sort of safe space for boys. We want you to select a male member of staff that the boys relate to, the boys feel comfortable with, and we want that male teacher to take part in our whole program with the boys. They are going to be essentially one of the lads. They're going to answer all the questions. They're going to be involved in all the activities, all the debates, all the conversations. And the reason why we do that, it's usually the PE teacher, I have to say. That's usually the person that ends up joining me. And we do that for two reasons. One, it gives them the ability to hear what the boys say. It gives them the opportunity to be involved in some of these conversations. And again, for some of the things that we talk about, this could potentially be the first time these boys have ever had these kind of conversations. So it's a great insight for that member of staff to hear, wow, I didn't even think they were going through these issues. So it gives them a little bit of an eye opener, and it allows them to be informed about their boys, but also it allows them to support them boys moving forward. So what we do in our program is we promote. Now, all schools have different things in school, so it's down to the school. But we say that the boys that we work with, we want to give them an opportunity to play an active role within your community. We want to bring back that voice for boys. So that could be them becoming peer leaders or male mentors or male champions, playing an active role in what they think boys need in school. And again, that member of staff, it becomes their daily contact moving forward as they go through the year groups. I'm obviously not there every day. So again, it allows them to have that person in school that is their potential role model. And again, it just breeds this more, it makes them feel like they're more included in the community. So yeah, that's something that we do now. And again, it's to bring that male figure into their life that they can have these follow-on conversations with. It's so important.
On sort of like teachers, role models, male, female, what would be one or two things that you would say to a female teacher, a mum, someone who is a guardian of a boy, and to sort of start to understand or start to maybe move them in a more healthier pursuit of manhood?
So I've got three things for you. So these, when I do staff training or we work with parents, and again, this transcends again throughout all of our work. All of our work is different, but there's lots of overlap between bullying, online world, boys issues. So I always promote three things. This is my 3-step approach to working with young people. Be open, be positive, and be curious. So be open to having conversations with them. Be open to hearing things that you didn't really want to hear. Be open to understanding and looking at life from their perspective. The second one is being positive. Always try to look at the positive outcomes when having conversation with young people. So as we said right at the start of this conversation, when we looked at critical thinking and helping boys to critically evaluate what they see online, again, we always start with the positives. What do you like? What's beneficial? So always try to steer the conversation into the positive areas. So you may hear something that's negative, but how can we turn that into a positive? Always try to look at the positive outcomes. And the last one, which is probably the most helpful, is be curious. Talk to them. Ask them what they think. Ask them how they feel. Ask them, find the why. Why did you do that? What made you think about that? Being curious is so important for young people, because we all think as adults we got it all sorted. We was young people. I'm 51, so when I work with children, I make this really clear at the start. I was a young person a long time ago, but I'm a dinosaur compared to you. So my job today isn't to tell you what to do or how to be a man. My job today is to sort of guide you and share my life experience, but it's also to learn from you. I want you to educate me. I want you to tell me about your life. And being curious is the best way to do that. And I find through being curious and allowing children to talk to you, you don't need to be an expert in any field, whether that's social media, whether that's other areas of the online world, or you don't need to be an expert in mental health or young people. All you need to be curious, and then other things, be open and be positive. And through them conversations that you have, your life experience will take over. Your life experience will provide what your people in your life need. So again, that's a long answer, but them three things: be open, be positive, and be curious, is the recipe, I think, for healthy debate and healthy conversation, and also provides you an angle to support them.
It's a great answer. Long's better for that. I think no one wants a one-word answer with that. Richard, in the men and boys space as a whole, what is one thing that you really like at the moment, and what do you want to see more of?
So one thing I like is these conversations are becoming more common. One thing I like, even though I hated the backlash from that show Adolescence, but one thing I do like is it has sparked conversation. It has sparked debate. We are now starting to understand that boys are struggling. They do dominate lots of statistics. They do underachieve in school compared to girls. They're more likely to be excluded. They dominate statistics in regards to the unemployed, the homeless, gang members. And obviously, I'm sure you would have had people on your podcast in the past talking about male suicide rates. These are now starting to become common knowledge. There's obviously a lot of way to go, but I like the fact that people are now starting to talk about these things. I don't think this podcast would have happened 10 years ago. So bringing these issues into conversation is important, and moving forward, I just hope there's more of them, more balanced conversations, and more people not telling young people what they need or what they should do, but bringing them into the conversation. And that's what I try to do through my work. And there are others, obviously, that are doing that. And I think that's really positive, giving young people a voice.
Amazing. Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure. If people have liked what they've heard and they want to find out more, where is the best place to find you?
So on LinkedIn, lots of our work we promote on LinkedIn. So that will be obviously my name, Richard Pomfrett. And for the people that are not watching this, that haven't got my name on screen, that will be POM for mother, FRETT. You can find me on LinkedIn, and that will be a place where I share all my work. And our two websites, so our Stay Safe work, that will be the work that we do surrounding bullying, peer mentoring, and helping children be safe online, is the Stay Safe Initiative, all one word, .org.uk. For more information about our boys program, our Boys to Men work, and again, that's work that focuses in from primary, secondary school, and to higher education. Our website is boys with a Z, -men.org.uk. And from them websites, you'll find our other social links as well. But yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Richard. I will leave the final thoughts with yourself.
The final thoughts with myself. Be open, be positive, and be curious. And bring the children in your life inwards and have conversations with them. And your life experience will do all of the hard work for you from that point.